Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Babbling Idiots. I'm Patrick here with Eric today.
Hello, everybody.
um, you will be seeing this on Monday the 25th, so that's what day it is, I guess. And Eric has some stuff to talk to you
Okay,
about.
so after the tumultuous weekend that we talked about in the last episode, it what's the word? It reached its climax. I don't know what the right word to use is at the New York primary on Tuesday. Um, and disappointingly, Hillary won that primary. But it's funny. I think I haven't looked into it enough to fully understand it, but I think there's some like investigation now because there might have been some because it was a closed primary, so you had to have been a registered Democrat to vote in it. Because a lot of Bernie's supporters are independents, there's a lot of controversy over that possibly turning away a lot of voters because you had to have registered, you had to have known that you needed to be a registered Democrat for it. And I think other than that, there's some other stuff. But it's funny, I think people have been talking about Hillary has only won 2 out of the last 10 primaries, and those 2 primaries she won are under investigation for like voter fraud.
Yeah, that's a big one because, like, in that Bush versus Gore whole thing,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, that's what it kind of reminds me of. Just because Gore won the popular vote, but
Mm-hmm.
Bush got the right amount of states to get those electorates so that he could win the
Mm-hmm.
election. It's
And
just at points like this, you gotta wonder if like delegates and electorates are like the way to go in
mm-hmm.
terms of nominating our
Mm-hmm.
representatives.
And I don't know enough about what was going on with Gore and Bush in the 2000 election to have a respectable opinion about it. But it just always seemed fishy to me that the state that was under so much controversy was Florida, where George Bush's brother was the governor. So that seemed a little fishy. But like what you said about delegates uh, over the weekend that we were talking about in last episode, uh, I I wrote a blog post about the whole thing with Hillary's big fundraiser at George Clooney's house and the transcripts and Bernie's tax reforms. And then the next day, I released another post saying why I think Hillary is anti-democratic, which I convicted her of. Not convicted. I said she was anti-democratic in the first post, but in this one I was talking about super delegates, and I was basically saying how uh, since super delegates they often vote based on what the popular vote is. So if Bernie got the popular vote as like eventually Barack Obama did in 2008, they would switch. Well, if uh, then they just switch to whatever the popular vote is, then there's really no reason to have super delegates. But since they're all part of the DNC and they all want Hillary, if if Bernie got the popular vote and they decided not to switch, which they could, they don't have to vote with the way the people do, then Hillary could win. And just as the case was in 2000, Bernie could get the popular vote and Hillary would still get the nomination. That's why that the whole superdelegate system is just seems so anti-democratic to me because it's not based on what the people want. There's no point to have superdelegates because either they vote the way everyone votes, so there's no reason to have them, or they choose not to vote the way the people do, and that's completely anti-democratic.
Nah, dude, we've had them since like 1984. We just gotta keep having them. That's how it's
Yeah,
gotta be.
appeal to tradition. I mean, usually when we appeal to tradition, it's like when the country started, but 1984, that's only like I can't do math.
Like 40 years ago. Wait,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But and I was also pointing out, ironically, political parties aren't government organizations.
Yeah, they're
They,
private
yeah,
institutions.
they weren't created by the Constitution or the government, so they essentially choose how they run their elections.
Well, I mean, it's just basically a big club.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can do whatever they want just because they're a private institution, and we look at them as though they're part of our election system, but they're not at all. And the only reason it seems that way is just because the media portrays them as like the definite way to get into a political election. And so it's just they're not actually part of our election system, so they could do whatever they want. They could be like, whoever donates the most amount of money to our party gets to be our nominee, and that would be perfectly within their rights. And so I think that's a distinction that people need to start making, is that they keep on yelling at these political parties for being undemocratic, but they don't have to be democratic at all just because they can do whatever they want. It's not like corporations are democratic, and it's the same thing essentially.
And I think that's one of the many reasons Bernie's so popular among a lot of people. Like we and everyone else has said, Bernie and Donald Trump are the two anti-establishment candidates. But I think talking about Bernie, he's so popular because he's the one that's truly kind of shining a light on how all this stuff works and how certain people are loyal to the party in an obscene way. And it's funny when I think about Bernie shining a light on like political fraud and everything, because Ted Cruz is over there saying, he's always talking about the politicians in Washington and they don't know what they're doing. And it's funny because he's like the exact kind of politician that people don't like. He's the one that we're so angry about. So he thinks he represents the anger that people have of politicians in Washington that don't know what they're doing, but he's like the main one that we're angry about.
And the thing is, Ted Cruz to me is like you just said, he's the politician that doesn't know what he's doing. Like, this dude's tax ideas are just the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, two things.
The IRS.
Exactly. Two things. Those two things exactly. Flat tax makes no sense at all, okay? That is the most unequal thing I've ever heard of, because let's say, I think I've said this before on this show, but let's say that the flat tax is 50% just for this kind of representation. Then a person who makes $30,000 a year would only have $15,000 to live on, and a person that made $100,000 a year would still have $50,000 a year. It obviously is biased towards people who make more money, so that's not fair at all. And then, like, getting rid of the IRS, well, then no one's going to get audited, and people are just going to not pay their taxes at all. And then what is the government going to do? They're not going to have any money. And I read this thing online about that this worker for the IRS said, and he was like, basically IRS funding has slowly been getting cut these past few years, and because of that there are so many fewer audits that are going on by the IRS. And so it's very likely that a lot more people are getting away with tax evasion because the IRS doesn't have the ability to audit people because they don't have the money to do it. So it's one of those things that if they put more money into the IRS system, they would get more money back. And I don't know if it would be like equal amounts or if one would cost more than the other one, but
recently we've been talking about the Republican narrative, and when it comes to taxes, you have those two issues we just mentioned, the flat tax and abolishing the IRS. And there's Republican narratives for each of those. The Republican narrative for the flat tax is somehow they've convinced people that this helps the working class Americans, when, I mean, that you're still being taxed, I guess, a similar amount if you're a working class American, but it's letting the upper class get off. I don't see how that's helping the working class. And then the narrative for abolishing the IRS, or maybe not abolishing, but just having a huge problem with the IRS, is they're making life harder for the IRS. And then after they do that, they complain about why. They're like, why isn't the IRS doing its job? It's because you're not letting it do its job.
yeah, that's one of the big checks that Congress has on the like executive bureaucracies of the government, is they can just cut their funding, and when those groups don't have any money, then there's nothing that they can do to do their jobs, essentially, you know? So it's like funding to those bureaucratic groups is really important, just because if you didn't give money to the FDA, suddenly all of our food would be terrible. Same thing with the USDA. And I mean, just the things that we get from NASA, like there's so many inventions that we use daily that we get from things that NASA has researched. So I think it would be in our best interests to fund them a little bit more, because they get like half a penny to every dollar of our tax. And I don't know, I don't think the Republicans are putting our money in the right place.
Have you ever seen the video of Ted Cruz like questioning that they were having some? Ted Cruz is actually on some committee that's the head of like he's like on a science committee, which is pretty scary. But there's a video of him talking to like at a committee meeting or whatever. I forget everything from senior year gov, okay? But he's talking to like one of the heads of NASA, and he's questioning they're trying to talk about how much money NASA's going to get. And he's questioning this guy from NASA about where their money is being allocated, and he's showing Ted Cruz has this graph, and it's showing that most of the money NASA spends is on environmental research and environmental science. And Ted Cruz isn't like completely against NASA. He wants America to be, the leader in space exploration, as everyone else does. But what he's complaining about here is that this space administration is spending all the money that Congress is giving them on environmental research. And being the climate denier that he is, yesterday was Earth Day, and I made a pretty extensive blog post on the candidates, each candidate on climate change. And so he's like furious that the space administration is spending their money on environmental research. And this guy's trying to talk sense to him, like, this is a big problem we have. We need to put research into it. So just, I forgot where I was going with this, but it's pretty scary that he's the head of this science committee. And but we're just talking all economics, which is like, I can only talk economics for so long until I want to move on to something a little more that gets us going a little more.
Well, something about NASA is, interestingly enough, the Chinese government has issued the statement, and they're like, the Martian is an example of the community of America wanting a unified space project, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what they're trying to say is that them and Russia and us, so the US, Russia, and China should all be working together in their like space research and stuff. It's an interesting thing because America is basically saying no, because they're like, because China once did this missile test, like they tried to research anti-satellite missiles, and they're like, we're not going to work with you because of this, and like, working with you would pose a national security threat. But Russia and America both have anti-satellite missile systems, so it's kind of messed up that they're like, oh, we're not going to work with you because you were researching this, but we're allowed to have it. And that's just something that I've always thought is kind of weird. Like, obviously we wouldn't want like nuclear weapons, for example, in the hands of Iran and stuff, but when you say you're not going to work with someone, wouldn't you be able to monitor what they were working on even better in that circumstance? Like, you know the saying, everyone knows the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So I don't understand why we wouldn't want to all work together in terms of space exploration.
And talking about space, I mean, one of the things I'm really passionate about, you hear people a lot of times, people on the right especially, okay, like questioning why we're putting so much money into space exploration and everything, and you just don't understand the things we get from it. Like you said, like more things than you can imagine that we have, we get from our research and experience with exploring space. So much medical stuff, communications. You wouldn't be able to talk on the cell phone if we didn't have as good a space program as we do. Transportation. That's just a few things. There's so many different things.
I found this list online, so I'm just gonna read it off because it's not that many things that it would be crazy, but I'll just say some stuff that stands out to me. Baby formula, cell phone cameras, computer mice, cordless tools, ear thermometers, golf clubs, MRI and CAT scans, memory foam. You gotta have that mattress, dude.
We need that.
Solar panels, safer highways, shoe insoles. I would never have expected that.
Mhm.
I don't even know why they'd need those in
Mhm.
space. There's no weight. Adjustable smoke detectors, water filters, and UV blocking sunglasses, which makes sense because
Yeah.
the screens on the front of astronauts'
Yeah.
helmets and stuff to
Yeah.
block out the sunlight.
Well, you said, it's funny you said like insoles. Why would they need that? A lot of stuff like that. I mean, a lot of clothing stuff you wouldn't really imagine being related to space exploration, but a lot of it's because of the spacesuits. I mean, they need things that can keep you safe from all kinds of things that can happen in space, and of course, comfort is kind of an important thing. I mean, to say a spacesuit is comfortable is nowhere near the truth, but you need to be able to function in a spacesuit, and so it's hard to imagine where we would be if we didn't have the kind of space program we do have. And another important thing is that space exploration provides exploring space is really where humanity comes together. Like when we had, back during the Cold War and everything, we had really terrible relations with Russia.
Yeah,
One of the
space
things
race.
that got us out of it was space exploration, because a lot of people typically think of the space race as being a hostile event that took place over the 60s, but it ended up being one of our greatest ways of kind of reaching out between countries. And so space exploration isn't just something we do to better ourselves now. It's something we're doing for the future of humanity, because eventually and this is the thing Ted Cruz needs to understand, where our ultimate goal of space exploration is to be able to find other planets we can colonize. But that's if this planet fails us. And so the reason our space program puts so much emphasis on keep taking care of the planet is so that we don't have to go and colonize other planets. But that's, of course, another thing we're looking towards if we need to do that. So our space program is about not just exploring space and fulfilling our human desire to learn more about the universe we're in, but also to just make sure humanity isn't wiped out anytime soon.
Yeah, because if we are on two different planets, then if one of them gets destroyed, the human race would still continue. But something I want to say about how people talk about money in terms of space research, people act like if we sent, I remember this when we sent Curiosity to Mars, the Mars
Mhm.
rover. People were talking about it as if all the money that we spent on that program went with Curiosity to
Yeah.
Mars, and it's not like that at all. Like, the money that we spend in space programs goes back into our economy because
Mhm.
NASA's buying things from companies, and they're buying like computers, or they're buying space parts.
Mhm.
And it's not like that money disappears. It helps our economy grow because it allows businesses to run, because obviously there's probably some really specialized businesses out there that only exist to make NASA parts and stuff. So
Mhm. And people that are opponents of a lot of space exploration, they look at how much these missions cost, and of course they're hugely expensive. They're millions to billions of dollars. But then you can play the game of making a comparison, and you say, hey, this war we were in, like Iraq or Afghanistan, for instance, a month of that could have given us like 2 or 3 of these missions.
yeah.
And so when you make comparisons to that, well, it doesn't sound like a whole lot. And there's things that we're spending money on that people don't complain about, but then they're ready to complain about space exploration because they don't understand the benefit that it has. It's not just something that's going to benefit our country. It's fulfilling the ultimate goal of humanity. I mean, you can't really put a price on that.
Something that I've always kind of dreamt of is, and this is just kind of going off on a tangent, but if we had a space station on the moon, that would make the manufacturing of like space vehicles so much easier, because one of the biggest problems with things in getting into space. Like we have to get that force to like rocket off of Earth's gravity,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just a pain in the ass, man. Like you have to waste like the majority of the rocket just to get out of Earth's gravity field. And so if we had things on the moon, we wouldn't have to worry about that at all. And imagine if all of the resources that we use just to get away from Earth were used just to move forward in space. It could make us go further than we've been able to go previously, especially in manned missions. And another reason is because the moon is rotating around the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be able to use it almost like a slingshot to sling a spacecraft on a tangent off of the moon's rotation around the Earth. And that would, I don't know, that would just be so cool.
Well, I think we've already done that before.
Well, yeah, we've used the moon's gravity well to get the moon missions back, but I mean, instead of going towards the Earth, like going away from it.
We might have already done that. I mean, I know gravity assists are a common thing in all kinds of missions throughout the solar system, but I'm wondering if we've done it with the moon itself and not just the Earth, because we've definitely used the Earth for gravity assist, but I wonder if like the moon itself, we've used it for gravity assist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny when you were talking about this came up in my mind for some reason. I was thinking maybe if you have you're able to build stuff on the moon, like space vehicles and satellites and everything, it might be easier to build something that is capable of working in interplanetary space, because I know one of the problems, and not like we can't already fix these problems here, because I was thinking about the Hubble telescope when we first launched it. One of the problems was we didn't account for the fact that once we put the telescope into zero gravity, it was going to affect how things work. So they built the lens and everything, and these are huge lenses. They're so expensive. They're polished perfectly, and they didn't account for the fact that when you take it off the Earth, gravity won't be affecting the lens the same way. So because of that, the lens got shifted like a couple millimeters or centimeters or so, and just that little bit on this big lens makes everything blurry. So they had to a space shuttle mission had to go and fix that. And I was just thinking, if we're on the moon, that makes it more similar to interplanetary conditions, so that might make it easier. But I'm also thinking that might not make sense, because I think we have everything worked out. We know how to do it now because that happened, and we've had so many problems like that before. So maybe that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the biggest thing about making things on the moon is just they don't have to leave Earth, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the big thing with space travel, is that's the expensive part too, because all of those parts just fall off, you know, like on the space shuttles and on the rockets, they just fall off and we don't get to use them again. So
that's why SpaceX is their big challenge right now is trying to land those parts on barges in the middle of the ocean so we can reuse them, because of course a huge expense is the fuel is incredibly expensive, and the rocket boosters are incredibly expensive, and before we haven't really been able to reuse them, I don't think. But being able to land them on a barge, which I think they've already done at least once.
Yeah, they had a video. It was so hype.
Wasn't I know recently it happened, but I feel like it happened another time a while ago.
I'm not sure.
Maybe I wasn't following it closely.
I know that they did get like a real touchdown, and everyone was really excited.
I think that was recently. I think the other one I was thinking about was a failed one a while ago.
Yeah, they did have a failed one that just didn't work out.
This is something I don't think I know enough to talk about, but I think it's really cool how for so long we've been doing all our space exploration with government agencies, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency and the ESA, but SpaceX is a private company now, so it's so cool that private companies are going to space. It's something that once seemed so like it has to be like an official, you have to be some official government company funded by billions of dollars to go to space. But now these private companies, which of course there's a lot of money still going into it, and they work with the government, But that's what gets people thinking about, like, oh, within a couple of decades, we're going to be able to. There's going to be space tourism and everything. And it's still going to be really expensive for a while, but I'm just really interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, and I mean, something that's kind of a driving force is if these missions, like if these private missions were able to mine one asteroid, basically
That's a
they'd be
big
set
thing.
forever. Like there's so much research on I mean not research. There's so many resources on asteroids and just on planetary bodies and stuff that
Mm-hmm.
especially some of the rare earth metals and stuff, they're just on asteroids
Mm-hmm.
and all of the scientific stuff that can't go forward because they can't get their hands on these rare elements. You could just mine them from an asteroid.
That's a huge thing that they're talking about right now, and I'm really excited about it because I know Neil deGrasse Tyson has talked about it, and he's really excited about it. He says those asteroids are filled with rare earth metals. The reason they're called rare earth metals is because they're very rare on Earth, and they're expensive because of that. They're very valuable. So he said, I guarantee you the first person that finds that is capable of mining those is going to become the richest person on the planet. Because, I mean, it's just such an exciting thought to me. I mean, not only for that person that is able to mine asteroids, but just for what we're going to be able to do with all those resources.
And I
And
mean,
go ahead.
that person's just gonna be the next Rockefeller, baby. Rockefeller, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just gonna have so much money that they won't even know what to do with it. And it's crazy just because everyone will be trying to buy things from them. Like when the government is trying to buy stuff off you, that's probably when you know you've made it, you know? So it's kind of scary though too, because we had that problem with monopolies in America.
Mm-hmm.
And if one person has the ability to go and mine these things from asteroids, like what are the economic implications of that? Because the economic implications of monopolies where it screwed everyone over except for the people who own those monopolies. But
Mhm.
with this, it's not even like, oh, we're just blocking you from mining these things. It's just like, hey, we're the first ones to be able to do this and no one else can. And it's not like you can break that up. And I don't
Mhm.
know, the economic implications
Yeah,
are
it's
a
like
whole thing.
who's going to be able to stop them? Because it's not like I can just build a rocket and go and mine an asteroid. I mean, I don't know how uh, oil worked back in the day, but I mean, it's here on the planet. You can go mine oil, but the asteroids are in space. You can't just hop on a rocket and go to an asteroid and just get out a pickaxe.
And another thing is every country will want to buy these rare things from them. So it's
Mhm.
not like America will be like, hey, you can't be a monopoly, because then they'll just be like, okay, we'll just work out of China, and China will definitely let us do whatever we want. So I don't know. The globalization and economics are just scary and huge concepts.
But I'm hoping we have policies in place that won't happen again, because we already have the experience that tells us that ends up not working very well for anybody.
Yeah, but like I said, we have policies in place for companies in America, yeah,
Mhm.
but this company could just move to China or move to Russia, and those countries won't care, like especially China. They're not going to care about the economic issues involved with that. They're just going to be like, "Oh yeah, sure, bring us that wealth and make all of the other countries want to buy stuff from us," you know?
Mhm. I'm really interested in this. I want to look into it more
Yeah,
because
maybe
I don't know everything we're saying about this could be completely wrong, but
Well-
it's an interesting thing to talk about.
we might
We'll look into it more.
we'll look into it. Might talk about it next time too.
All right. I know we were talking about something before, which we've wanted to talk about for a while, and we have touched on it a little bit, but we think it's time to bring it up again because I have some I have my thoughts put together on it now. Because the other day in my world religion class, we're in our Islam unit. I know you're in your Islam unit in your religion class.
Yeah.
It was our final day, so of course we had to talk about the issue of Islamophobia in the United States right now. And my class, as most people say about college classes, is fairly liberal, and I'm part of that, but I wanted to play devil's advocate a little bit that day, because I'm not like a far left liberal. I'm somewhere in the middle. So of course we have our end of class discussion. Everyone's talking about why Islamophobia is bad and why it's not fair, and they said everything I agree with. And then I wanted to just bring up saying, hey, I'm someone that is going to be critical of Islam just as I'm critical of any other religion. And then I made myself appear reasonable enough. My goal wasn't to come off as some radical person, because I'm not some radical person. I believe I'm reasonable in what I believe. So I was saying there are people like me that are critical of people within the Islamic world that hold these beliefs. I'm only interested in criticizing the people that have these radical beliefs. So when I talk about Islam and I criticize these people, I'm only talking about those people. So I'd like to be able to talk about them without people calling me an Islamophobe, because I feel like on the regressive left, they just want to call everyone racist for having any criticism of Islam, and they fail to understand that, of course, there's people, Donald Trump, and there's people out there that don't have the understanding that not every Muslim is a terrible person. Most Muslims are great people, and they have the same values and beliefs that we do. But you have to be willing to criticize the people that hold bad ideas, just as we're willing to criticize Christians that have bad ideas, and we're willing to criticize atheists that have bad ideas.
Yeah, no one's trying to support neo-Nazis.
Yeah. And I was trying to voice that. It's just frustrating to me that we can't have any discussion about it, because the second you bring up you have any doubt of Islam, you're instantly a terrible person. And I also brought up the idea of people like me, we express the idea that Islam is just as diverse as any other religion. A lot of times where Islamophobia comes in is because we obviously see that Christianity has a lot of diversity, because there's all different kinds of sects of Christianity, and because Christianity is the #1 religion here, we are able to see that. And Islamophobia can come in when people see Islam as being more or less the same throughout. And of course that's not the case. And it seems like that to us because most people are aware that there's Sunni and Shia, and most people aren't aware of anything within Islam other than that. So people like me, our argument is there's so much diversity within Islam, we're only interested in criticizing people that hold dangerous ideas. And then the argument for the people on the left against those that are truly Islamophobic is Islam is so diverse, how can you say that a couple bad people here represent all of Islam? So it's really frustrating to me when people like me say, Islam is so diverse, I'm only interested in attacking these people that have bad ideas. And then people on the far left say, Islam's so diverse, you should only criticize those people with bad ideas. So why are people that are willing to criticize Islam, but only those people, the bad guys? We both agree that there's so much diversity in Islam and that we should only be criticizing those people.
I just don't understand why there's so much focus on Islamic terrorist groups when there are so many other types of terrorist groups around, you know? Like, I'm just looking at some Christian terrorist groups right now just because I was curious. And in 2014, in Central Africa, there was this Christian militia. They destroyed almost all the mosques in Central Africa. And Amnesty International reported several massacres where, like, they were just making Muslims flee the country, and some people even reported Muslims being cannibalized. And it's like, that's worse than anything I've ever heard any Islamic terrorists doing. Like, I've never heard of any Islamic terrorists eating people, you know? So it's just like, these things are going on in all places. Like, all religions and all locations have their form of terrorism. And it's just like, I don't understand why there's so much focus on Islamic terrorism.
Well, because it's the most it's perceived as the most immediate threat to Americans. And like you were saying, here's the thing, like, this is what the right's version of what the left is doing would be. Someone on the right would hear what you just said, and they'd say, oh, that's disgusting. You're blaming all of Christianity. You're saying Christianity is bad. No, you're not. You're only criticizing people that do these horrible things. So then people on the left have to understand that we are only criticizing these people that are doing horrible things. And of course, that's not to say that there's serious Islamophobia. There is serious Islamophobia. One of the girls in my religion class, she lived in Alabama for most of her life, and she tells me stories of some of the most insane, like, you wouldn't even believe the insanity of some of these people. These are like American Southern Christians, and of course, like, again, the right's gonna say I hate all Christianity. No, I'm only criticizing these people with these beliefs. She's an atheist, and she had to be closeted because of how extreme these people were. These are people that, like, I'm not comparing them to Islamic terrorists that actually kill people and torture people, but these are people that do not understand that other people can have different beliefs. To them, their belief is the only thing you can possibly have, and if you don't hold the same belief as them, they have a huge problem with that. She said these people would say that we should line up all Muslims and shoot them and terrible things like that. So, of course, you have to understand, you have to be willing to criticize anybody that has bad beliefs and is not promoting free humans and freedom of thought and everything.
Yeah, like something that we don't even touch on because we don't even recognize it is we have Christian terrorists in America.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone has heard of the Planned Parenthood shooting, and that's an act of terrorism. And I don't think many people think of it as such. They're like, oh, someone just shot up this abortion clinic. But that was an act of terrorism. Like, that guy is trying to scare people away from getting abortions. And so he's terrorizing them. And no one ever, like, I've never heard any media coverage of that call it terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was trying to say basically before, is that we only identify acts committed by Muslims as terrorism, even though we have terrorist acts occurring by citizens of our country, you know? So, I don't know, I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but it sounds like a way to consolidate power, you know, to have this abstract enemy in, like, a faraway, scary place where it's always, like, there's always war going on, and there's these scary people over there and they want to hurt us, so you have to let us protect you. And okay, you can't talk about all the things you want to, but we're protecting you. And it just sounds like a way for the government to consolidate its power to me. And I'm probably sounding like a conspiracy theorist to a lot of people, but that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, people are gonna call me like some liberal extremist, some PC regressive leftist for saying this, but you have to understand, like, I'm trying to remain nonpartisan in this and just staying with something that's the truth. That bombing or shooting up a abortion clinic is terrorism. Like, people don't call that terrorism because it was carried out by a white person. Like, this isn't, I'm not trying to play identity politics here, but that's true. In my terrorism paper, I cited some article that was pointing out that more people were killed in the country in the past few years by right-wing extremist terrorists than Muslim radicals. And I mean, that's another point, but I think the main idea in what I addressed to my class that I didn't bring up yet was you have to understand the left is right in saying that there's some unnecessary Islamophobia. I read an article the other day, I don't know if you heard about this guy that was on an airplane and he was talking Arabic on the phone, like, because his native language is Arabic. So he's just speaking Arabic on the phone. And the lady next to him seemed really concerned. And she heard him say, Inshallah, which is the Muslim expression, if God wills it, which really just means, I hope so. And that's a very common expression in the Islamic culture. I mean, I hear people say it all the time.
People even say that in English, you know?
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, God willing, you know, people say that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or like people will be speaking English and then they'll just say inshallah, like because it's just a common Muslim expression. And so she reported him, and this guy got interrogated and everything, and he had to get on another plane 9 hours later. And it's like that's Islamophobia. And I understand the argument. Like I think it's true that San Bernardino could have been stopped if someone was less like you heard that the guy didn't report suspicious activity because he was worried about being called an Islamophobe, and that's a legitimate concern. But someone talking on the phone in their native language, which it might, if it wasn't even Arabic, if it was any Middle Eastern language, I swear that lady probably would have been just as concerned as she was. It could have been Farsi or Armenian or Turkish, and she would have been just as concerned. But getting back to what I was trying to say, the point I was trying to make in the class is the left is right in saying that there's Islamophobia and racism, but I think we're led to believe that there's less people with these radical beliefs than there actually are. People often say, oh, there's 20,000 people in ISIS, and they say there's 1.6 billion Muslims and there's 20,000 people in ISIS. That it's not a huge problem. But what you have to understand, that's 20,000 people that are in ISIS. There's millions of people in the Middle East, in the Muslim world there, that believe that if you leave Islam, you should be executed. Anyone that isn't Islamic, we have a problem with them. And that's not like being a racist or anything. Those people actually have those beliefs. And so I think it's important to make the distinction between the religious beliefs that people have and the cultural beliefs. Like a huge majority of Muslims in America don't hold those beliefs. They're just as Muslim as, well, I don't want to say just as Muslim because those people are perverse Muslims that hold those beliefs.
Yeah.
But there's a cultural difference. People in the Middle East are much more likely to hold those beliefs than people in America because American Muslims are very well assimilated. They hold the same values we do. So it's disgusting when Ben Carson says, I wouldn't support a Muslim president because they don't hold the same values that we do, when they're just as American as you and me. They were born here.
They have to be born here to be president.
Yeah, some of them are probably even more American in a sense than me and Ben Carson. So there's a pretty good amount of people, not all of them, of course, before people start misrepresenting my argument, in the Middle East that hold those beliefs. And then there's still a concerning amount of people in Europe, part of the West, that still hold, maybe not to the extent that people that leave Islam should be killed, but still hold beliefs that I think are just not in accordance with the values we hold. For instance, I think around 58%, you can look this up, don't take my word for it, 58% of British Muslims believe that the Danish cartoonists that led up to Charlie Hebdo should have been prosecuted. 58%. Like, I would be seriously concerned if 5% said they should have been prosecuted.
Wait, what was that?
They were the cartoonists that it led up to Charlie Hebdo, and they drew cartoons of Muhammad.
That makes a lot of sense to me, though, because that's sacrilege, essentially. Like, Muhammad is not supposed to be portrayed, essentially. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, a lot of people might, they might just let it fly, but there are Muslims in America who believe that Muhammad should be taken off the Supreme Court building, and there are people who get really angry about it because that's just one of their central beliefs, because they believe it takes away from God. It takes away because you'll start worshiping icons, essentially. Mm-hmm. So that's a big deal to them, and it makes sense that they would think like, hey, this isn't cool, like this isn't something someone should do. It's like if if someone portrayed Jesus in a bad way, people would be so angry about that, you know? So, and it's even worse for them because Jesus is supposed to be portrayed in a lot of Christian religions, but you're not even supposed to portray Muhammad at all in Islam. So I can understand why they would think that these people should be like, there should be a punishment for them, and it wouldn't necessarily correlate to them thinking like any deaths should happen or anything.
Mhm. Well, of course they're not interested. I mean, I can't speak for them, but I'm assuming that by prosecuted they mean just be given some kind of consequence or punishment. But the arguments about freedom of speech, like if you can't punish someone for drawing a cartoon of something, even if you hold it sacred, even if it offends you, that's the most important part of free speech. Even something that offends you should be allowed. The comparison I make is I do not support anybody walking on the American flag or putting it on the ground or doing anything to tarnish it. It offends me as an American if you do anything to the American flag, and I do not support that. But I'll defend your right to do that, even if it's completely ironic that you're destroying the symbol that gives you the right to do that. I will defend your right to do that with the flag. I don't care if that offends people. That's, to me, the ultimate form of freedom of speech. So I don't think people should be punished for doing whatever they want with somebody's religious symbols, no matter how much it offends somebody, because that's the ultimate form of freedom of speech, is supporting speech that offends you. I support speech that offends me, such as walking on the flag. That offends me, but I'm going to support your right to do that. So, and people do do horrible things with the image of Jesus, and it offends Christians. And I think the majority of them will say that you shouldn't be punished for that, but it still offends me, so please don't do it. And maybe this makes more sense. I highly advise against you drawing Muhammad because it offends people. It's just like I said, I highly advise you don't step on the American flag because it offends people, and I think it's wrong. I think drawing Muhammad is wrong precisely because it offends so many people, but that doesn't mean you should be punished for doing it.
Well, you shouldn't be punished by the government, certainly. I definitely agree with that. But just, it's like you said, it's in poor taste, and there can be consequences. There definitely can be consequences for your actions. Like there was this crazy priest dude in the South a couple years back who was like, I'm gonna burn the Quran. And for people who don't know this, the Quran is essentially, you shouldn't draw a parallel from the Quran to the Bible. You should draw a parallel from the Quran to Jesus. Like the same level of reverence is Islam to the Quran as Jesus is to Christians. And so this guy's like, I'm gonna burn the Quran, and he got death threats from people who were like living in the Middle East and stuff. And so many Muslims in America were like, please don't do this. Like, this is just a terrible idea. Because if people burn, like if someone, here's a really good example of it. There was, these people were trying to attempt a black mass in Texas, I think it was. And they managed to get their hands on a piece of the Eucharist, or like the communion wafer essentially, that had been blessed by a priest. And to people who don't know this, Catholics believe that communion wafer, that Eucharist, is like actually the flesh of Jesus Christ. Like they believe that is Jesus like reincarnated into our lives, and like it's a gift for us. And I remember, because I grew up Catholic, I remember that they taught us, like, if you even drop a few crumbs on the ground, they will stop everything to, like, clean them up and make sure no one steps on them or anything. Like, it's a big deal. And all the bishops in the area were, like, they went crazy about it. And eventually they got the Texas governor to step in and make them give it up. And he confiscated it, essentially, because it's a huge deal to them. And that's just the level of, like, to religious people, it's unthinkable to do these kinds of things. So these are huge levels of things. And so is people who are Muslims saying that they think what, like the drawings of Muhammad, they think those people should get persecuted? Well, I just drew a parallel to Christians believing sort of the same thing and it happening essentially. So it's just it's something that you can't even understand it really unless you are someone who is really deeply religious to that point. Because to a religious person, that would outweigh all political things, all rights and all of that. It'd be the utmost priority to fix those issues.
I'm sympathetic with the connection people have with their religion, but I'm completely against putting religious beliefs against the rights of others. Like don't connect what I'm about to say with what I just said. But maybe a better way to put my thoughts on this like free speech issue is after Charlie Hebdo, there were people that were saying, well, they shouldn't have drawn cartoons of Muhammad because it just incited anger and everything. Well, I don't care. Your beliefs being offended by someone for your religious beliefs is no reason to go and kill people, and it's no reason to say that people deserved to be killed for offending others, especially when it's something that was comical. It was satire. It was Charlie Hebdo pokes fun at extremists. It's one of the greatest things you could possibly do. And what's frightening is the people that say this are people on the left, and these are the same people that when it comes to rape, they're arguing, oh, don't blame the victim, don't blame the victim. When you say that Charlie, the cartoonist, should not have drawn those pictures, you're blaming the victim. So why do you get to say don't blame the victim in one instance when it supports your interest, but not in this other instance? And of course, before everyone says like I condone rape or something, that's completely insane, and women should not be blamed for being raped. Like before, I need to make all these clarifications so the left doesn't accuse me of being some kind of insane person.
If you haven't noticed already, I am kind of taking a devil's advocate approach here, which is kind of an ironic term right now. But anyways, just because I feel like there's definitely an argument that needs to be said against what Eric is saying, even though I agree with a lot of what he's saying, because I am a firm advocate for human rights and just like our liberties, like free speech and such. But I need to say that to a religious person, God would be the one who gave you these things. Like God is the one who lets you have freedom of speech, and God is the one who allows all of this. So if you're doing something against God, wouldn't it kind of make sense that it's not like it wouldn't make sense, you know? Like sure, there's free speech, but if free speech is given to you by God and you're using it to attack God or attack things that God has told you, that's just another side of the story that I think needs to be said in this case.
Well, it's still completely insane to me. It doesn't. I just don't like how, like my whole argument. I mean, this is just a small part of it, but I don't like how we've represented bad ideas within Islam as being like such a small part. It is, of course, still a small part, but when you say 20,000 people, when there's people outside of that, like an important thing to bring up, I'm surprised I haven't brought it up yet, was Sam Harris, who I talk about a lot and I respect him a lot. I can't say I always agree with him, but he's definitely a critic of Islam and has to keep clarifying himself because people keep misrepresenting his argument. But a year or two ago, he was on Bill Maher's show, and this was like such an infamous thing. People are always talking about it now within the community that talks about things like this. But Ben Affleck was on the show then, and they were talking about Islam, of course. And Sam Harris brought up this idea that he brings up a lot of times about these concentric circles. So in the middle, you have jihadists who seek to kill people. These are the ISIS fighters we talk about, and the Taliban, and people in Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram. And then he says outside of that, you have Islamists, which are people that are interested in, as you said before we started talking, I think, that's the more political ideology. They want kind of an Islamic world, and they see it as the one true religion, and they want Islam to have some political dominance. And then there's people outside of that will put Islam over more secular, I don't want to say secular, but like human rights, like anything you do to that offends the name of Islam, I think you should be punished. And he's arguing that those three groups are a pretty substantial portion, substantial in relation to what we consider like small. I think he said like 20% of the Muslim world, and most of that is in the Middle East, but then some of it's also in Europe. And then Ben Affleck, you could tell he came onto this show ready to attack Sam Harris. And if you just watch the video, it'll probably do better justice than what I'm explaining. But probably even before Sam Harris has said anything that could be considered in any way Islamophobic or racist, Ben Affleck accuses him. He says that's racist, that's gross, that's disgusting, and he just starts going off on him. And people I've talked about before, I've heard people say that Ben Affleck was just looking for some social brownie points, which I think he was. I mean, it's just such an easy way to gain sympathy, to attack people that are trying to have a legitimate discussion about Islam, which is one of the things that frustrates me. It's so much easier to just call everyone that has any disagreement with Islam an Islamophobe than to have a legitimate discussion about people within Islam, not people that make up all of Islam, people within Islam that have bad ideas. So then what was pretty sad was Sam Harris, the reason he was on the show that day was to talk about a book he just wrote, his book Waking Up, which is a book he wrote to guide people in meditation without religion, because he's a believer, as so many that aren't religious, that even someone that isn't religious, you can still be spiritual. So the problem was, after that show, he spent his whole book tour that was about a spirituality book. People would come up to him and ask him questions about Islam, and he'd have to defend his stance on Islam. So this whole book tour, where he was supposed to be promoting his book on meditation and spirituality, he had to spend the whole time defending his stance on Islam, which has some things that his stance has some things I disagree with, and some things that I don't think are completely reasonable. But he's not some lunatic. He's not racist. He has very reasonable concerns.
I don't think it's a question that is ever going to have a perfect answer, and we can talk about this all day, and I enjoy talking about it, but unfortunately, this episode's starting to get to the point where we have to wrap it up. So if you want to hear us talk more, you're going to have to wait till next week. Do you want to?
That went so quick.
Yeah,
because it's such a huge issue. We can just keep talking about it, and we will keep talking about it.
It goes on forever, honestly.
There's no end to it, and we have to talk about it because we don't know. There's just so much we have to wade through. And I mean, we're not the first ones to do this. There's been so many people that are talking about it.
Exactly. Anyways, thanks everyone who tuned in. Come back next week to hear our next episode. And like us on Facebook, follow us on iTunes.
Check out my blog.
Check out Eric's blog, The Babbling Idiot. Have a good day, night, whatever. Bye.